During the height of the Cold War, survival wasn't an abstract idea, it was a science, an engineering race happening quietly beneath the surface of ordinary life. Families, soldiers, entire governments understood that if the unthinkable ever came, only those who prepared with precision would have any real chance. Nuclear fire, fallout clouds, shockwaves, these weren't movie scenarios. They were real possibilities that forced humanity to rethink the concept of shelter from the ground up. Hidden beneath backyards, dug into mountain rock, buried under city streets, engineers created bunkers that were far more than holes in the earth. They were self-contained, temperature-stable, radiation-shielded ecosystems built to sustain life for weeks or even months without ever touching the outside world. And what's remarkable is that even with all of today's technology, the core ideas behind those Cold War shelters still outperform most modern prepper designs. The Cold War pushed engineers to design for absolute independence. When civil defense manuals began circulating in the 1950s and 60s, governments weren't just preparing for explosions. They were preparing for isolation, cut off from power, food, and fresh air. The real threats weren't just heat and blast waves, but starvation, radiation, and the brutal loss of warmth once electricity failed. So they developed the idea of the passive survival structured shelters that used the earth itself as insulation, as protection, and as the most reliable temperature regulator you could ever ask for. Buried deep, surrounded by compacted soil, these bunkers gained an incredible natural advantage. 6 feet of earth could reduce radiation by over 99%. And that same earth kept the interior temperature steady at around 55 degrees Fahrenheit. No heater buzzing, no electricity humming, just nature doing the work. That's why so many Cold War bunkers remain surprisingly comfortable today. They were built around physics, not machines. And it wasn't just about staying warm, it was about staying alive. One of the greatest challenges was ventilation. Without constant airflow, oxygen drops fast and carbon dioxide rises even faster. But during radioactive fallout, opening a window or even a loose vent could be lethal. So engineers invented manual, pressure-sealed air systems powered by hand pumps, pulling air through layers of filters, sand, charcoal, and particulate traps that stripped out radioactive dust. Larger bunkers even built underground maze-like tunnels, called air labyrinths, forcing incoming air through twisting, soil-lined passages that filtered and cooled it naturally before it reached the living space. To keep that air safe, the shelters maintained a slight positive pressure just enough to ensure that contaminated air could never seep in. This same principle is still used today in submarines, biolabs, and secure underground facilities. The Cold War engineers weren't improvising. They were mastering airflow physics with nothing but simple tools and smart design. Radiation shielding followed the same philosophy. It wasn't about buying the strongest material, it was about using layers of different densities to scatter and absorb radiation particles. Soil, gravel, concrete, steel, mesh, even barrels of water or sandbags. Each layer captured a different part of the radiation spectrum. In rural areas, simple trenches just a few feet deep with angled walls and a roof of timber and earth offered radiation protection far greater than their simplicity suggests. Inside, exposure could drop to a fraction of what you'd experience above ground. And then came temperature management. Without fans, without air conditioning, without heaters, Cold War shelters solved the problem by using narrow entrance tunnels, thick walls, and underground water tanks to create natural thermal stability. The walls absorbed body heat during the day and released it slowly at night, smoothing out the temperature swings. What was once a survival necessity is now a trend in eco-architecture, reborn under names like Earthship design. But long before it was stylish, it was survival science. Perhaps the most impressive part of all is durability. Unlike modern prefab bunkers with plastic parts and electronics, Cold War shelters were built from reinforced concrete, packed earth, wood, stone materials that don't decay easily. Don't rely on technology that can fail. That's why so many of them still stand today after 60 or 70 years. Untouched, silent, and structurally sound. They weren't built to be flashy, they were built to last. When you study one of these old shelters, or if you ever build something inspired by them, you quickly realize that the brilliance is in the balance. Every vent, every angle, every inch of soil had a purpose. These designs weren't about brute strength. They were about harmony with the natural forces that surround us. Survival through equilibrium. And in a strange way, the Cold War era defined by fear ended up producing some of the smartest, most resilient architectural ideas in human history. Ideas that still save energy, still protect lives, and still shape the way militaries and survivalists design shelters today. If you're fascinated by how forgotten engineering still outperforms modern designs, or how past generations prepared for a world on the edge, there's so much more to uncover. The past still holds lessons that might be just as valuable for the world of tomorrow.